Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was June 10th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today I've got a treat for all of the archive nerds out there. We are looking at the very first folio of a register. It is Register 1867, one of the Comune Sigilli Secreti registers, and it's actually labeled as Comune Sigilli Secreti 1 for the reign of Joan I. So you might be thinking, wait a second, the secret seal is supposed to be a higher level than the commune. What are these two categories doing being smushed together? And if you are asking yourself that question, then we have something in common, because I also am wondering, why would you want to put those two things together when it seems like they would sensibly be in different registers? So I do not know the answer to that question right now. For some reason, there was an overlap in these two categories, and there needed to be a register for that situation. But let's talk about the materiality of this for a moment. On the webpage for today's episode, I'm actually going to post the cover page of the register, and then the verso side of that folio, which is blank, and then also folio 1R of the register, which is where our document is. It's the very first document of the entire register. It's just so fun. Oh my gosh. Let's talk about the cover page for a moment. So these registers, they were rebound, I think in the 18th century, maybe the 19th century. So when they were rebound, they were sometimes put together in weird ways. Like there's a particular Violante register that's actually like very weirdly combined different sections from throughout her life and out of order. But I think most of the time, the archivists who were working on this project in this kind of modern era, they were dedicated to trying to have it make sense and keeping things together and not combining too much. And so most of the registers that you'll see from around this time, they're coherent, meaning that if they're about 300 folios, then that was the number of folios that were originally produced together in the chancery. So, all right, that's one thing to keep in mind about this particular register. I think we've got a coherent unit in this register. So the whole thing itself, I think, is about 250 folios. Can't quite remember. What I want to point out, though, for today is the cover page, where we've got just this really interesting variety of scripts. So we have this is an original cover page because the thickest, largest script on there is definitely in the kind of hand that would have, well, wait a second, I have to pull back on that, because look at that humanistic script at the end, right after the thickest script. I think, oh gosh, are there two different scripts in the top three lines? That's a question. None of this looks especially coherent, to be honest. with what is present inside the actual documents, and we can't exactly trust what's at the top of folio 1R because that could have been added later. But I will say that if we're looking at the thickest script, which would be line 4 of the cover page, look at the name of Joan at the very end there. That is humanistic script. It is absolutely not the kind of handwriting that people in 1387 were using. So that was absolutely written much later, and maybe somebody at the time wanted to do cursive handwriting, something, I don't know, maybe 16th century, 15th century. I don't know. I think someone with a lot more paleographical knowledge would be able to pin down which centuries and maybe even which decades these different handwritings came from in lines 1 through 4 on the cover page. Then we get to the word estancia. It's the 5th line of the cover page. Now that is, I think, definitely like a 17th century or 18th century handwriting. And that's really interesting because it means its location. And then I think the little caret that's at the end is like a little pointer that it's in order 6. So it's like the 6th of the cabinets, I think. And then calèche means drawer. So it was in drawer 23. So from what I can recall in my research about the archive of the Crown of Aragon, which it's been a little while, it's been, maybe, is it 2 years now since I was working on this? Maybe? No, could have been, yeah, 2 years. Oh my gosh. So I really dug deep into the history of the archive itself and how things were organized, and I did see a picture or a drawing of the cabinet that's like being referred, or like one of the cabinets that's being referred to here. So I think they had a cabinet made to store all of these things, a series of cabinets, because they just accumulated just so much paper documentation. And so we have something like cabinet number 6 and drawer number 23. And I do have a theory that these registers were stored horizontally, and having them in a drawer, a calèche, would support that theory. Now, might be wondering, if you're looking already at folio 1R, there's clear wormholes in the top third. There's 2. There's one kind of toward the left margin, and then there's one kind of in the center. And they don't at first glance appear to be in the cover page, but if you look closely, you can see them. What happened during the digitization process was that they, in some way, put something black behind the page as they were scanning it. And so that way, if there was a large wormhole and there was text on the next folio, it wouldn't show through and cause confusion in the digitized image. And so these black wormholes, they show up as black in the digitized image because there is some kind of background material that's used for the purposes of taking its picture. So in the photography process of this mass digitization project. And so what we see on the cover page is that they didn't use that for this particular picture for some reason. Not quite sure why. And then on folio 1R, you'll notice that there's more extensive worm damage on the bottom, but it's covered up by like a repair piece of paper on the cover page. And that repair piece of paper, I think, had more acid in it, more of like an acidic composition, because you're starting to see way more of the deterioration of the paper from the chemical ingredients that were put into the paper at a later time. I think I'm reading that right in terms of how I'm understanding that piece of paper that got pasted on top of where there was wormhole damage. And you might have noticed in previous registers and in previous documents that it looks like there's little pieces of tape or something like that are on the document. And I think that there was an extensive repair project carried out sometime like in the 18th or 19th century on these documents. Okay, and then I think that's everything I wanted to say about the cover page. There's a couple other inscriptions on the cover page that I'm not quite sure what's going on there. On the left, midway, well, there's like some Roman numerals. I'm not quite sure why those are there. We can maybe investigate that later if we want to get really into it. But I just wanted to provide you all with a glimpse of what the cover pages look like, because they're their own record of archival work throughout the centuries, and I think that's really fun to look at. All right, another record of archival work greets us on Folio 1R. We have a later hand in that thick ink putting the name of the register at the top left. That was not done in 1387, that's for sure. And then a later hand looking like a cursive from the 19th century that identifies the person about whom the document is written. And this was also done for the second document on the folio. Some of the folios, there was a researcher in the 19th century, could have been Beaufourul, not sure, who wanted to be helpful, and for posterity, that researcher put the name of the person ahead at the top in the center of that of each document. And so here we can clearly read Hugh. What does it say there? It says something, well, gosh, I said we can clearly read. I mean, I can't even tell what is at the beginning before the HUG, but it's basically Hugore de Angulario Compti Cordone, or Cordonem. I just don't know what is in cursive before that capital H. So, yeah, I should not have said clearly. It's clearly written there. There's clearly writing. That's not from the time. But what it says, that's still a little bit of a mystery. But indeed, we can see that the addressee for this document actually is in the third line. So we have our usual start, Nos Johannes, Die Gratia Rex, etc. And then we get right down to business. So we have insolutum pro rata illorum octo milliem florinorem auri de Aragon debitorum. So, per curiam nostrum. So the court owes 8,000 florins, gold florins, to this person, and this whole document is about how they're going to be paying it back. So in line 3, we've got Hugoni, or maybe that's not an N, it could just be Hugo. No, I think it's an N. Hugoni de Angularia Comiti Cardona. This person actually was of the nobility, the Count of Cardona, and he was quite old at this time. He had been somebody pretty prominent in the court of Per the Ceremonious. Apparently he was good friends with Sibylla de Fortia, and so, it's a little bit debatable about how then he would be in relation to Joan, right? But it seems like from the general entries that I'm looking at just Wikipedia and then also the Gran Encyclopedia Catalan, the entries indicate that he did okay. Like, he was fine. He was able to negotiate that transition from Pere the Ceremonious to Joan the First, and he was pretty wealthy and prominent and had some exploits and adventures, blah, blah, blah. Nothing all that dramatic, it seems. So at one point, he loaned the court 8,000 gold florins. Well, I think that's interesting. It seems like maybe it was done in late April because there is this notation right after his name, cum lettera nostra datum Barcinone, and then the date of the 27th of April. So, okay, so he lent 8,000 florins, which, just let's review the money here. That would be 88,000 solides. We know from the work of Yedo Ruiz Domingo that when Violante was Duchess of Girona, her annual income was about 400,000 solides. So gives you an idea of how much money that was. It was quite a lot. But think about it from the point of view of more of an everyday person. Way back in the beginning of the podcast, we looked at a treasury record for a payment to a baker in Violante's household. And that payment was for 3 months of work, and the baker got 356 solides. So that gives you an idea of the scale of how much money is being discussed in this document. The baker for 3 months gets 356 solides. This particular loan was 88,000 solides. Okay, more interesting stuff to come, because on line 5 we have the name of Johann de Muntros. Johann de Muntros. Now, here's something. Okay, wait, hold on. Did I do that? Nope, sorry, that was line 6. Johann de Muntros was involved back in May with doing the collections of the new tithes, which actually are referred to as decimum tithes, and both the decimarum or the decimum and the word tithe, they both have kind of the word 10 inside, right? So a tenth is what's being referred to there. It's not exactly, I think, a tenth. It's just the name of the tax. So maybe it could be 10%. I don't know. So in line 5, we have the decimarum nobis noviter per dominum summum ponte. Now, that, I think, is an abbreviation for something much longer, pontificarum. So I think what's being referred to here is the new tithe that has been granted concessarium, a concession from the great Lord, the Pope. So here is one of the outcomes from that financial victory that Joan had from the Pope to authorize more money to be collected from church institutions. So way back, I can't remember exactly when, but a couple months ago we heard about how Sardinia is having a bit of a rebellion and money is needed to send troops there. So that's where some of that money is going to go. But Johann de Muntros is also going to take 88 solides, which is 8,000 gold florins, and is going to take that amount and give it to this Hugo de Angularia, what's his name? The Count of Cardona. Let's just go with that. It's going to give 8,000 gold florins to the Count of Cardona. So there's already debts that need to be paid back, which is interesting. That when they show up to begin their reign, they don't have a big pile of treasure that they can start spending. There has been a need to take out a loan already by April. So that's an interesting detail to note. There's something else important to point out about this document, that in line 9, we have this phrase, realiter prosolvendos. That Claude thought meant it was going to be paid in real coin and not in the money of account. So keep in mind that at this time, there was a lot of deal making and purchasing, spending, a lot of transactions. That's the word I want to say. There are a lot of transactions that took place only on paper, and that allowed for greater financialization and more loans and economic investment because you didn't have to arrange to deliver big piles of coins. And so money of account is one of the major developments of the late Middle Ages in terms of how frequently it was used. And it's all over the place in Barcelona. The Barcelona economy was highly financialized. Maybe not as much as, say, Genoa, but it was highly financialized. So what that means is that there was a lot of bills of exchange, money of account, investment structures, loan terms, all kinds of financial instruments in order to power economic development. And so the idea that we have here, a promise to deliver coinage, is a little odd. I'm surprised to see it. I have some doubts about how Claude was identifying that phrase as saying there were going to be a big pile of coins. And I will say that part of this document arranges installments. So they're going to be paying back the 8,000 in pieces of 2 different installments of 2,000. And so what's being discussed for this realiter per solvendos statement is 2,000 florins, which I think, is maybe more reasonable to think of in the actual coinage. But I just want to flag that as something to see if I can get a little bit more information about from some other sources about whether that actually means that 2,000 gold florin amount is going to be delivered in coins and not in a bill of exchange. There's the use of the word apoca in this document again. I just think that's fun to say. That just means there's going to be a receipt. It'll all be above board. All right. Now, here's the moment where, once again, we see co-rule. Because what would you expect at the bottom of this document in the probata? I didn't say it at the beginning because I wanted to save it to the end. Keep the suspense. Everyone was like, where's the probata? Maybe not. So you would expect something like it's coming from the treasurer of the king. You would expect maybe something like coming from the, vice chancellor, something like ex provisione facta per vice cancelleronem, whatever. But no, what do we see there? It is a very clear domina. That is an A, D-N-A. So that is the queen. Domina regina mandavit mihi. And then we've got Petro, the P with the O above it. And then on the next line, de beniorem. So once again, we have the queen has directly commanded this to Per de Beniore. We have the vice chancellor signing the document, and it's in Joan's name at the top and entered into his Commune Sigilli Secrete register. So why? Why is it that we have Violante involved in this document? It seems like there's no need for that unless it should be Joan, but he is busy doing other things. Maybe he's preparing for the big bullfighting match that he has been arranging. Maybe he's still feeling ill. Maybe he's out hunting. I don't know. He's not the one in the probata, though, that's for sure. It is Violante. So, let's just keep an eye on that and see how frequently Violante turns up in the probata for documents that are sent out under the name of the king. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Moltcara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and those cover pages, as well as additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.